She didn't come in a suit. No title. No assistant. Just a quiet black woman in her 40s named Danielle Harper, holding her wallet at Monarch Federal Bank in Tucson. She asked for a simple withdrawal. The manager glanced at her ID, then smirked. "Doesn't look like you?" He never checked the system, never asked a question, just saw a black woman and assumed the worst. But Danielle wasn't just a customer, she was the CEO. And what happened next would expose a truth too many try to ignore. Subscribe now because stories like this aren't rare. They're just rarely seen. Danielle Harper stood frozen for a moment, her fingers tightening around her plain leather wallet. The manager, Stephen Aldrich, still leaned against the counter, arms crossed, face smug. He had dismissed her, laughed at her, doubted her identity just because she didn't look like the image he had in his head of a CEO. Danielle didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just stood there watching as he turned his back on her, the same one she'd felt as a young intern when security followed her through the building because they thought she didn't belong. The same pain when she'd been passed over for promotion 3 times before finally being recognized. This wasn't new, but it still cut deep. She took a breath and stepped back from the counter, phone in hand. She could end this now, but something inside her told her to wait. She turned slowly and looked at the teller. Sherry, barely older than 20, now fidgeting behind the glass. Danielle asked her softly to check the name on the ID and the account. Sherry hesitated, glanced toward Stephen's office, then began to type. Her eyes widened. The screen told her everything. Danielle Harper, CEO, executive account. Sherry looked up, pale, unsure of what to say. Danielle gave her a slight nod, an encouraging, calm gesture. Just then, Stephen returned, still holding his clipboard like a shield. He hadn't bothered to check the system, hadn't bothered to ask. Danielle spoke now, asking again if there was still an issue. Stephen scoffed, made a sarcastic comment about playing dress-up, and demanded she leave. And that's when something changed. The customers who had tried to ignore it began to pay attention. One man even lowered his phone. Another customer, an elderly woman with a cane, leaned forward and whispered, "Sweetheart, you okay? That man was out of line." Danielle nodded. "I'm handling it." She pressed a button on her phone and made the call, HR. Stephen no longer had control. People began to whisper. "Corey." Another teller stood up and looked at her. "Wait a second," he said, realization dawning. "That's her, Danielle Harper. I saw her speak at the regional conference about leadership and integrity." Stephen tried to recover, insisted she was overreacting, and claimed he was just doing his job. "You refused to check my ID," she replied. "You made a decision based on how I looked. That's not protocol. That's prejudice." And then it happened. Just as Stephen's voice began to rise, the front doors opened. 2 people in dark suits entered, Marlene from HR and Roland Pierce, the regional VP. They walked straight to Danielle. "We got here as fast as we could," Roland said quietly. Stephen tried to protest. She gave no warning. I didn't know who she was, but Marlene's voice cut through the tension. "That's not the issue." She told him plainly he was being terminated not for being rude to the CEO, but for violating protocol, showing disrespect, and creating an unsafe atmosphere. The room went still. Everyone could feel it. The shift. And Stephen, once so sure of himself, now stood there stunned, shoulders sagging, finally realizing what he'd done. But this story wasn't over. Danielle stayed behind after the termination. She called the staff into a brief meeting. She told them she had come in looking like an everyday customer on purpose because she wanted to see how people were treated when they didn't appear necessary. And what she saw was painful. Not just the way Stephen treated her, but how others hesitated. Corey admitted he'd frozen up. Sherry confessed she was scared to speak out. Another teller admitted they'd seen Stephen act like that before. just never to someone with power. And that's the problem, Danielle said, because if he speaks to a CEO like that, how is he speaking to our everyday clients? She promised change, announced mandatory training, and then added something else. She'd be visiting other branches unannounced in the coming months, and sometimes she'd be dressed just like today. But for all her strength, Danielle knew something inside her still ached. Because even with the victory, she hadn't escaped the more profound truth that this happened because someone saw a black woman and assumed she didn't belong, that if she hadn't spoken up, hadn't been the CEO, she might have been escorted out, that the woman from Flagstaff who had written a complaint months ago about a similar incident hadn't been believed because she didn't have power. Danielle didn't come in today to make a scene, but she left, knowing that scene had revealed everything, not just about one man, but about a system that still judges worth by appearance. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling this, then you know it too. These stories matter. They happen quietly every day, and most don't make it to a boardroom. Danielle's story isn't just hers. It's every person who's been doubted, dismissed, or respected because of how they look. So, if this story stirred something in you, if it made you pause, made you think, don't let it end here, subscribe to this channel for more real-world stories that uncover the truth, challenge bias, and remind us all what respect should look like. Danielle Harper didn't sleep that night. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. Press is requesting a statement. The board wants to meet on Friday. Regional VPs sending support messages. Danielle stared at the screen, then turned it over. The next morning, Danielle woke early, showered, dressed, and instead of taking the call with the board, she got in her car and drove to Flagstaff. She didn't tell anyone, just opened the address from that old complaint letter. She remembered the one written by a woman who had said a manager treated her like she was a scammer, refused her mother's check, and spoke to her as if I'd walked in covered in dirt Danielle had always meant to follow up, but got buried under mergers and meetings. Now, though, it wouldn't let her go. The drive took 6 hours. Danielle parked in front of a small, an older woman answered cautiously. Danielle introduced herself. The woman's eyes narrowed with memory. "You're with the bank." "Yes," Danielle said. "I read your letter. I was hoping you might talk with me." They sat in the small kitchen. The woman poured her tea. Slowly. "I never thought anyone read that letter," she said. "He looked me up and down like I was trying to steal from my mother. Refused to touch the check. I cried in the car afterward. It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it, like I didn't belong." Danielle nodded. Her voice caught when she replied, "I do know what that feels like." She didn't stay long, just long enough to apologize not on behalf of the company, but as a woman who'd lived that same judgment. Before she left, the woman touched her arm. "You handled him better than I could have." "I just ran out of there," Danielle forced a small smile. Sometimes staying takes more strength than running. But as she drove away, she wasn't so sure. The next few days blurred into cold meeting rooms and conference calls. Roland helped field the media inquiries. The board praised her for her measured response, and yet one executive asked, "Do you think maybe you overreacted by firing him publicly?" Danielle stared at him over Zoom. "He humiliated me in front of customers. Why is it only an overreaction when the consequence is public but not the act?" The man didn't answer. And then the emails started, not from employees, but from strangers, black women who had walked into branches and been questioned. Latinx customers are denied loans without full reviews. One message read, "I used to work at Monarch. I left because my manager told me to wear more makeup to look trustworthy." Another, "Thank you for what you did. We saw it. We needed to see it." Danielle forwarded every message to HR. She began compiling them into a private folder, labeled unseen. Some nights she sat with that folder open, reading message after message until her eyes stung. Each story is a mirror. Each one proves that what happened to her was not an exception. It was the rule when no one was watching. And still it got harder. The press began to twist the narrative. One outlet asked if Danielle had staged the visit as a trap. Another headline read, "CEO goes undercover bank manager fired after mistaken identity." That hurt most. Mistaken identity. She was never hiding. She handed over her ID. She gave her name. The mistake wasn't hers. It was the assumption that a black woman couldn't be the boss. Danielle didn't speak publicly. She didn't want sound bites. What she wanted was something more profound, so she decided to visit every regional branch herself, quietly alone, not to test, but to see. And what she found left her with even more weight to carry. One branch had an employee who told a woman wearing a hijab she couldn't sit near the counter for security reasons. Another had removed Spanish language brochures. Another had exactly 0 black or brown employees. Danielle took notes. She didn't yell, didn't announce who she was. She just watched and felt the old ache come back. At night she cried, not for herself, but for the countless customers who walked into banks hoping for help and left with shame. For the single mom who was denied a cashier's check because she didn't appear trustworthy. For the grandfather in overalls who had to bring 3 forms of ID to cash his check. For all the invisible scars that didn't end in headlines. She began to wonder, was she making a difference? Or just putting a bandage on a system bleeding from the inside? However, at one branch, something unexpected occurred. A young teller, maybe 19, recognized her. Danielle braced herself, but the girl just smiled and said, "I saw the video. I'm proud to work here now." And in that moment, something shifted, because maybe it wasn't about fixing everything at once. Perhaps it was about showing people what courage looked like, one moment at a time. Danielle Harper stood alone in the quiet of her downtown office, staring at the skyline as morning bled into the blinds. Coffee in hand, suit jacket draped across the chair, she looked nothing like the woman who had walked into that Tucson branch just weeks ago. But she didn't feel like her either. She was tired, bone deep, tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying something unseen, the expectation to be perfect while being doubted at every turn. She had endured another board meeting that morning, another round of questions disguised as concern. "Are you sure your response wasn't too strong? Do you worry this is becoming personal?" One board member, a man who hadn't built anything real in decades, dared to say, "You should be careful not to alienate our white clients." Danielle had looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm not alienating anyone. I'm reminding everyone what respect looks like." But even as she spoke, a heaviness settled in her chest, because deep down she knew they still didn't get it. They didn't understand what it felt like to be reduced to a stereotype in your own house, to walk into a building with your name on the plaques and be told you don't belong here. She set the coffee down. Her hands shook slightly. Not from fear, but from restraint. Because every step she took now was under scrutiny, watched, judged, and measured. Not just by the board, not just by the media, but by every person who had ever been silenced in a space where they should have been seen. The story of her bank visit had gone viral. Tens of thousands of messages poured in, some full of gratitude, others full of hate. One email read, "You're just another angry black woman playing the victim." Danielle read it twice, then deleted it, but it stayed with her. Not because it surprised her, but because it didn't. That kind of cruelty always lurked just beneath the surface, and she knew if it hurt her, a CEO with power and visibility, then what must it feel like for someone without a title? For a teenage cashier trying to get a loan for a refugee mother who barely speaks English, for a black veteran asking to open a retirement account and being told to come back with proof. She needed to act, not just speak. So she did something bold, something most execs wouldn't dare. She released the footage, raw, unedited, complete. From the moment she stepped into the branch to the second, Stephen Aldrich was fired. She didn't do it to shame him. She did it to expose the moment, the one we've all seen or lived when someone decides you're not worth believing. The reaction was instant. Some praised her bravery, others accused her of exploiting the incident. But Danielle didn't flinch. She stood in front of cameras at a live internal town hall and said, "This isn't about me. This is about every person who's walked into one of our branches and felt invisible. Suppose seeing it makes you uncomfortable. Good. Change starts with discomfort." The room was silent, but afterward dozens of employees approached her. Some cried, some hugged her. One woman whispered, "You made me feel like I matter again." Still, the battle wasn't over. A leaked memo from a rival financial firm accused Monarch Federal of creating a spectacle and alienating core demographics. The headline spread. Danielle felt the sting, not because it threatened her, but because it threatened the truth. It tried to erase the reason she acted. She stared at the screen and whispered to herself, "They want me to shut up, to back down." But she wasn't going to, because something deeper was waking up inside her. Not rage, not revenge, but resolve. The kind that only grows in people who have nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. She drafted a personal letter, handwritten to every regional employee. Not a copy, not a template. One by one. Over 200 notes. Each one is different. Each one signed, each one reminding her staff. You have the power to shape someone's day. Don't waste it. She initiated a new initiative called the Walk-In Project, an internal program in which bank executives would randomly visit branches in plain clothes and anonymously record their experiences. No one would know when or where, but every report would go straight to Danielle. Some protested, called it invasive, but Danielle stood firm. "If people only behave when they think power is watching," she said, "then we don't have a culture. We have a performance." And slowly, the culture began to shift. More employees came forward with stories, some beautiful, some painful. One young man, a teller in Dallas, wrote, "I saw a manager speak over a deaf customer. I didn't say anything, but I will next time." But with progress came pressure. The more she spoke up, the more resistance she faced. Her public ratings dropped. Anonymous threats trickled in. At a leadership conference, a man she'd once mentored told her, "You're making too much noise. Don't ruin your legacy." Danielle didn't even blink. "My legacy isn't quiet." And still, every night the loneliness crept in. The emotional cost of constantly fighting, of being strong in public and unraveling in silence, of watching herself become both a symbol and a target. She thought about her mother, who once worked as a janitor in a bank, and told Danielle when she was 7, "One day you'll walk in through the front doors, not the back." She had. But now she realized walking through the front wasn't the victory. Changing what happens inside was. And now, dear listener, if you're still here, if you've walked with Danielle through every cold glance, every dismissive smirk, every cruel comment, then you know this story isn't just hers, it's about you. What will you do the next time you see someone being ignored, doubted, or dismissed? Will you stay silent? Or will you speak up even if your voice shakes? If Danielle's courage meant something to you, if her strength gave you pause, if her story cracked something open in your heart, then press the like button right now. Not for the algorithm, not for numbers, but to show her she's not standing alone. To show every woman who's ever been told she doesn't look the part that we see you, that we've got your back. Because silence protects comfort, but action protects people. Danielle didn't choose this fight, it chose her. But she stepped into it anyway, with dignity, with clarity, and without apology. And maybe that's what real leadership looks like. Not who stands tallest when the cameras are on, but who stands firm when no one thinks they're watching. So if her story lit a fire in you, if it made you look at your world just a little bit differently, then don't scroll past. Click like. Comment with one word, respect. Share it. Remember it. Because the next time someone walks in quietly, no badge, no title, you might be the one behind the counter, and the way you choose to see them could change everything. What no one knew, not the press, not her board, not even her most trusted deputy, was that Danielle Harper had already seen the storm coming. Long before she ever walked into the Speedway branch dressed like just another customer, she had spent months following a quiet, personal trail of inconsistencies, whispered complaints, and hidden patterns. Something wasn't right. She'd noticed it first during a routine quarterly report, certain branches reporting customer complaints at 5 times the regional average. Still, those reports are being coded as customer error or incomplete ID. She started digging, not as a CEO, but as a woman determined to protect something sacred truth. And what she found led her to a mystery that went beyond bias. It pointed to deliberate sabotage. Employees who flagged mistreatment were reassigned. Customers with valid complaints were blocked. And in one haunting case, a whistleblower teller who sent an internal email warning about racist behavior at a high-volume branch in Mesa was abruptly terminated for performance issues. Danielle never saw the email. It had been buried, rerouted, but a copy had been left in a draft folder, anonymous, hidden, meant to be found, and she found it. So Danielle made a decision that would change everything. She created an alias, Elena Rivers, a consultant with no public footprint. Under that name, she submitted mystery applications to branches, asked questions, made phone calls, visited 3 locations in one day across Arizona. Sometimes she played a tired mother, sometimes an immigrant with broken English. And each time she recorded what happened, she watched as some managers leaned forward to help, while others leaned back their eyes. Cold voices clipped their masks, slipping. She took notes, every detail, every smirk, every denial. And at night, she cried not just from the weight of what she saw, but from the growing burden of knowing she had built a company where this could happen. But instead of breaking her, it sharpened her. Then something unexpected happened. One night after returning to her apartment in Phoenix under her Elena disguise, she noticed her car tires had been slashed. No valuables stolen. Just a warning. Her phone buzzed. No number, a message. Stop asking questions. Danielle didn't panic. She smiled. They're scared now, she thought, because silence had always been their shield, but now they were exposed. Still, it rattled her enough to take a step she hadn't taken in years. She pulled out a number written in faded ink. Victor Alvarez, a retired cybersecurity specialist who owed her a favor. She met him the next day in a dusty cafe with no cameras. Over hot black coffee, she slid over a file. I need to know who's hiding behind these approvals, who's pulling strings. Victor raised an eyebrow. And if they're inside your company? Danielle didn't hesitate. Then they don't belong in it anymore. Victor worked fast. Within days, Danielle had a report that confirmed her worst fear. There was an internal loop of middle managers using discretionary control to redirect high-risk accounts from minority neighborhoods, artificially deflating performance metrics and rerouting support resources to preferred zones. The paper trail was ghosted through VPNs and shell accounts, but Victor found the cracks. And that's when Danielle did something unbelievable. She flew to D.C. and met with 2 federal regulators alone and off the books. No entourage, no press. She sat across from them and said, "You don't know me, but you're about to." She handed over the files, gave them names, dates, patterns, and then added, "Give me 30 days to clean it from the inside or take it public." The regulators stared at her. One asked, "Why not protect your company?" Danielle looked him dead in the eyes. "Because protecting my company means rooting out the rot, not hiding it." Back in Arizona, the clock started ticking. Danielle couldn't move openly, so she made one final transformation. Disguised again this time as a compliance contractor, she embedded herself into the most troubled branch under investigation. For 2 weeks, she took notes, attended trainings, and asked subtle questions, and what she heard broke her heart. A manager laughing that people from the South Side always ask for overdraft reversals, and another saying clients with accents are always a problem. And the worst, an employee who quietly told her, "I see it happen every day, but I need this job." The pain was personal now. She couldn't sleep, could barely eat, but she kept going. Because this wasn't just a mission, it was a reckoning. On day 28, Danielle returned to HQ. Quiet, focused. She didn't call a board meeting. She called a town hall and live-streamed it across every Monarch branch. Standing at the podium in a plain navy dress, no makeup, no stage lighting, she began, "My name is Danielle Harper. I'm your CEO. And I've been walking among you under different names in different branches because I needed to see the truth without filters." The room went silent. Faces froze. Eyes widened. She continued. "What I saw was resilience, but I also saw cruelty. I saw bias, and I saw fear. Fear of speaking out. Fear of doing the right thing." She took a breath. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't break. "I'm here to tell you the fear ends today, because I've been investigating a series of decisions made on purpose, not by accident, but by design, decisions that have shaped the way we work, the way we treat each other, and the way we hide the truth. But that ends now. We are about to burn it down." The chat exploded. Some employees cheered, some panicked. One senior executive attempted to mute the stream, but was removed moments later. Danielle read out names, not to shame, but to document. Policies were being rewritten. Audits launched, and 3 resignations landed before the hour was up. But Danielle didn't celebrate. She didn't smile, because the victory was hollow without reflection. She ended the broadcast with a single truth. No one should have to wear a costume to be respected. Not in my company. Not anywhere. She walked off stage, knees weak. Her assistant caught her by the arm. "You did it," she whispered. Danielle shook her head. Not yet. She still had one more stop. The next morning, Danielle drove alone to that small Flagstaff house, the one where the woman with the wind chimes had made her tea. This time she brought papers, a new policy, a training module, a written apology, and a handwritten note. "You sparked a revolution, and you never knew it," the woman cried. So did Danielle. But they weren't tears of pain this time. They were the kind that come from knowing maybe, just maybe this time the world listened. So now, dear listener, if you're still with her, if your heart pounded when she stood at that podium, if your hands clenched when she found the slashed tires, if you held your breath when she read the file, comment below. Drop a word. Drop an emoji. Say something. Because Danielle Harper didn't just fight for herself. She fought for everyone who's been dismissed, profiled, and ignored. And she did it not in a cape, but in slacks and sneakers and silence. She walked through fire, so someone else wouldn't have to. She showed us that justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. It sometimes walks in quietly, takes a number, and waits its turn until it's time to change everything. Tell her you'll see her. Tell her she matters. Comment. Encourage her, because stories like hers don't come around often. And when they do, we have to hold on to them. We have to tell the world this is what courage looks like. It wasn't just a simple denial at a bank counter. It was a wound that reopened every scar Danielle Harper had buried over the decades, each one pressed deep into her memory, like fingerprints left on glass, faint but permanent. When Stephen Aldrich, that smug manager in Tucson, laughed in her face and said, "This ID doesn't look like you," he wasn't just questioning her name. He was challenging her existence. She has the right to stand there, her right to be seen. And what hurt most was not the disbelief, but the certainty in his voice, the way he leaned back and smirked, like he'd just confirmed what he thought he already knew, that a black woman in plain clothes couldn't possibly belong to anything powerful. And in that moment, Danielle stood at the edge of something old and painful, a line she'd crossed too many times before. She remembered being 15, riding her bike through a suburban neighborhood where police stopped her, asked whose bike it was. She remembered being 30, freshly promoted, and mistaken for the new assistant by the very person she was hired to manage. She remembered every time she lowered her voice, softened her gaze, and adjusted her tone to avoid triggering someone else's discomfort. Not anymore. But even after Stephen was terminated and the bank's leadership tried to issue clean statements and polished apologies, the damage was deeper. Because Danielle wasn't just dealing with one man's bias. She was standing inside a structure built on an assumption reinforced by silence, and her decision to walk into her company undercover wasn't a PR stunt. It was her last act of trust in a system she had helped build, and that trust was shattered. But Danielle didn't quit. She didn't rage. She didn't go live on camera with fury and fire. Instead, she folded herself into quiet, deliberate action. She risked her safety, her reputation, and her comfort to uncover the truth that would haunt her in the weeks that followed. As she stepped into branches under false names, visited cities where her photo wasn't on the wall, and asked questions that made supervisors fidget. She saw firsthand how many people only show respect when they think power is watching. And when her car was vandalized, and the anonymous threats started when she felt real fear tapping on her shoulder, she still didn't back down. She kept going. Because for her, this wasn't just professional. It was personal. What the world didn't see was the night she drove out to the middle of nowhere just to breathe. The night she sat alone on a motel bed, holding the old photo of her mother, Rosalind Harper, in a blue housekeeping uniform, smiling with her arm around a young Danielle. Her mother had scrubbed floors in a bank, just like Monarch always entering through the service door. And now her daughter, CEO of the very kind of institution that once ignored them, was being told she didn't look the part, Danielle whispered through tears. "I did this for you, Mom, and they still don't see us." But she wiped her eyes, stood tall and kept moving because she knew the risk of doing nothing was greater than the risk of being targeted. When she discovered the internal tampering, the redirection of high-risk accounts, the suppression of complaints, and the silencing of whistleblowers, it was no longer about her experience. It became about everyone whose voice had been silenced, who had walked into a branch hoping to feel human, and left feeling judged. She saw how the system, despite years of diversity statements and equity banners, still treated empathy as an optional feature. Danielle decided, not in my name. She reached out to regulators. She hired private investigators. She coordinated internal audits undercover. She moved like a ghost through her empire, listening, watching, documenting. And when they tried to scare her, to erase her steps, to accuse her of setting people up, She doubled down, because deep down she had seen something that wouldn't leave her an elderly man in Mesa with calloused hands and a check from his veterans fund who had been made to wait outside while they verified his history. That man never wrote a letter, never complained. But he had looked down at his shoes the way her father once had when the world told him he was invisible. Danielle knew that look, and she would not let it happen again. Then came the day of the town hall, when she stood in front of the camera stripped of pretense, with only her story and the truth. The world finally heard it all. She told them she had walked through fire, wearing the face of every silenced customer that she had pretended to be voiceless just to listen to who would whisper back in cruelty. That she had smiled through suspicion, been followed by security, and been asked to prove she belonged in buildings she had built. The chat exploded. Some cheered. Others froze. However, no one could deny what they had seen, and Danielle didn't sugarcoat it. She said plainly, "We are not who we say we are until we treat the least powerful person like the most valuable one in the room." What happened next was a wave she didn't expect. Hundreds of employees came forward. Stories poured in, change began to move, not from memos, but from hearts. Still, it came at a price. Her name trended. Critics called her too emotional, too extreme. But she never let that stop her, because her mission had already shifted. It wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. It was about walking into darkness and holding up a lantern even if her own hands trembled. And now, as you sit here reading this, you know the truth. The woman you saw calmly ask for a withdrawal wasn't just a customer. She was a leader who risked everything to see if her company would pass a simple test decency, and it failed. But instead of walking away, she stayed, fought, rebuilt, and when she had every reason to retaliate, she responded with integrity. When she had every reason to scream, she chose strength in silence. When she could have burned it all down, she decided to clean it out piece by piece. So now, if this story meant something to you, if it hurt, if it healed, if it made you look at yourself, your job, your silence in a new way, then don't scroll past. Leave a comment, share a thought, write her name. Danielle Harper. Let her know you heard her. Let her know her courage mattered, because the road she walked wasn't just hers, it was ours. Every injustice she exposed lives in systems all around us. Every risk she took was for a world we all share. And if we don't carry that weight together, if we forget, if we stay quiet, then the pain continues, dressed up in new uniforms and new excuses. Danielle Harper walked into a branch as a stranger. She walked out as a reminder. Titles don't earn that respect. That bias doesn't wait for boardrooms. That truth needs no permission, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the most power, not because of their name, but because of their truth. She lived that truth, suffered for it, and survived it. And in doing so, she didn't just change a bank, she changed us. Even after Danielle Harper exposed the truth, even after she stood on that digital stage and laid bare the injustices happening under her own company's roof, the fight was far from over. Things got harder, quiet threats turned into louder resistance. Some within the company, embarrassed by her actions, began treating her like a problem rather than a leader. A few executives resigned, not in protest of the misconduct, but in protest of her candor. One board member accused her of tarnishing the brand. "You made us look vulnerable," he said during a tense, closed-door meeting. Danielle looked him in the eye, voice steady but laced with pain. "We were already vulnerable. I just stopped pretending, and it hurt." Not the criticism Danielle had grown thick skin over the years of being doubted, but the realization that even with all the facts, all the footage, all the truth, some people would still rather protect their comfort than confront their failure. And she carried that with her, quietly, heavily, day after day. She returned to her office and found that her name had been removed from the glass plaque outside her door. "A branding update," they said. The receptionist began addressing her as Mrs. Harper again instead of Danielle. Harmless, maybe, but she felt it. The subtle distancing, the way people bristled around her, was like she had become radioactive. Even allies spoke to her more carefully now, as if truth had made her dangerous. And through it all, Danielle still had to lead, still had to approve budgets, still had to show up in town halls and smile and speak about momentum, when deep down she knew the real, painful, necessary work was happening in the shadows. She visited more branches, this time not undercover, and in a way that made it harder. She could feel the weight of every stare, every unspoken word. That's her. That's the one who exposed it. Some employees avoided eye contact, others offered forced smiles, but then there were those moments, the ones that made it bearable. A security guard in Tulsa handed her a note that simply said, "My daughter looks up to you." A Spanish-speaking client in El Paso who approached her quietly and said, "Gracias por vernos." And in moments like that, Danielle knew the pain she was carrying was having an effect. It was breaking the silence, and it had to hurt, because real healing always does. Still, there were nights she'd come home and fall into bed without taking off her shoes. Nights she sat on the edge of her bathtub with the water running, hands in her lap, eyes wet. Not crying hard, but that silent kind of cry that leaks out when the soul is just too whole. She didn't tell anyone how tired she was. Didn't tell her sister, didn't tell her assistant. She just carried it because that's what she'd always done. And some days she resented that she had to walk through fire and teach others how not to get burned. Then came the staff memo, a leaked internal message from a senior compliance officer, one she had once mentored, criticizing her initiatives, calling them a distraction from core business objectives. It hit the media within hours, and once again the narrative shifted. Now she wasn't just the CEO who exposed racism. She was the divisive leader, shaking confidence, and Danielle, sitting alone at her desk in the early morning dark, read every line. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from heartbreak, because she had given everything, and now her people were framing her fight for justice as a threat. She shut the laptop, walked to the window, looked at the city she'd helped grow, and for a moment she wondered, is it worth it? But then she remembered that woman in Flagstaff, the veteran in Mesa, the teller who whispered, "I stayed because of you," and she knew, yes, it was worth it, even if it broke, or even if they tried to rewrite the story, even if telling the truth meant losing the people who only liked her when she stayed quiet. Danielle wasn't going back. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't smoothing over hard edges just to make others feel better. And now, dear listener, you've followed her this far. You've seen what she's risked, what she's endured, how she's carried every ounce of pain with grace. And if her journey moved you, if her courage reminded you that truth is rarely comfortable but always necessary, then please leave her a comment below. Tell her she mattered. Tell her she wasn't wrong to speak up, because the world will try to erase stories like Danielle's. It will label bravery as aggressive and justice as controversial. But you can be the voice that helps hold her story in place. You can be part of the reason her fire doesn't burn out. Danielle Harper didn't just fight for herself. She fought for all of us. And if you felt that press-like, comment. Share it, because in a world that still whispers you don't belong, Danielle showed up and proved she did over and over again. Danielle Harper stood at the edge of the stage, a single spotlight warming her skin, as hundreds of employees sat in silence before her. Not the kind of silence that comes from distraction or boredom, but the kind that falls over a room when everyone knows something real is about to be said. Her breath was steady, but her heart was heavy. Not from fear, from the weight of everything she had carried to get here. The faces stared back at her faces, of tellers, managers, custodians, interns, people from all corners of Monarch Federal, the company she had fought to cleanse. And now as she looked out at them, she wasn't just standing as their CEO. She was standing as a survivor of everything this journey had demanded. The racism, the doubt, the whispered betrayals, the moments of loneliness were so profound that she thought she might disappear in them. The leaked memos tried to paint her as unstable. The doors that stopped opening, the invitations that stopped arriving, all of it. Still, she stood tall. "I didn't plan to lead this way," she began, voice low even, but wrapped in something raw. No one dreams of becoming the face of corporate shame or internal revolution. I didn't wake up hoping to fire someone on the branch floor or to find myself under attack for telling the truth, but sometimes leadership doesn't knock. It drags you out of your comfort zone and says, "You have to do this, even if it breaks you." She paused, scanning the room, eyes locking with faces that had cried with her, clashed with her, or feared her. "I've lost a lot this year," she continued, "but I've gained something I'll never let go of, a purpose. That purpose had come at a cost." Danielle remembered vividly the night her car was followed on her way home from a compliance audit. No official report. No clear threat. Just a black SUV that tailed her for 37 minutes before speeding off. She had pulled into a grocery store parking lot, sat there gripping the wheel, heart pounding. Not because she was afraid for her life, but because she was worried no one would believe her if something happened, that her truth would die with her. The next day, she flew to Chicago to meet with a group of tellers who had reported misconduct. Her presence meant the world to them, and their courage lit a fire in her that not even fear could put out. But it wasn't just the dangers that scarred her. It was the constant erosion of trust from people she had once called allies, the silence from colleagues she had mentored, the way they sat in meetings and said nothing when she was attacked, then sent quiet texts later saying, "You're right. I just didn't know what to say." And Danielle had to smile and say, "Thank you," even when what she wanted to say was, "You could have stood beside me, but you didn't." That loneliness changed her. It didn't make her bitter, but it made her clear, crystal clear about what she stood for and what she could no longer tolerate. And now, standing before her team, some who had doubted her, some who had whispered about her behind her back, she gave them the last piece of her truth. "I'm not perfect," she said. "I made mistakes along the way. I've raised my voice. I've cried in elevators. I've written emails I never sent. But everything I did for the people this company was failing to protect, and if I had to do it all over again, I would." Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't try to hide it. Someone in the crowd began to clap, then another, and another, until the room echoed with a slow, swelling rhythm of hands meeting in unity. Not applause for a polished executive, but thunder for a woman who had fought like hell to make the invisible visible. Danielle's throat tightened. She didn't cry. Not here. Not now. But she let the moment wash over her. When the room fell quiet again, she leaned forward into the mic. "This isn't about me anymore. What matters now is what we do next, about whether this becomes just another story or a spark that lights the way forward." She took a breath. "So I'm asking you, don't forget what we went through. Don't forget the looks, the assumptions, the quiet cruelty. And don't forget what it feels like to be believed, to be respected, to be seen. That's the standard now. And I expect all of us, especially those who stayed quiet too long, to rise to meet it. And now, dear listener, yes, you, the one who made it to this part of the story, if Danielle Harper's journey moved you, if you felt every betrayal she endured, every risk she took, every ounce of dignity she fought to hold on to, then don't just leave silently. Press the like button. Drop a comment. Say something. Anything. Because women like Danielle are the ones holding up the sky while the world pretends it's not falling. And the least we can do, the very least, is let them know we see them. She stood not to be admired, but to challenge us. She walked into the fire, not to be heroic, but because no one else would. And now it's our turn to speak up when someone is dismissed, to ask questions when silence feels safer, to stand next to the person who's alone in the room. Danielle reminded us that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It just needs to be spoken, and in telling hers, she allowed us to share ours. So if you've ever been underestimated, sidelined, silenced, if you've ever felt like Danielle Harper standing quietly with your wallet in your hand, just asking to be treated like you belong, then let this be your moment too. Press like to show her she's not alone. Comment to tell her she made a difference. Share this story so others know what courage looks like. Because leadership isn't a title, it's a choice, and Danielle Harper chose us. Now it's time we choose her. Danielle Harper's story didn't end with applause or headlines. It ended quietly, just as it began, with a woman walking through the doors of her own company. Not for attention, not for recognition, but for change. She still wore the same navy blouse and gray slacks, still held that same leather wallet in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. But now there was something different in her steps. Not the weight of survival, but the lightness of knowing she had finally shifted the ground beneath her feet. The journey had nearly broken her. There had been threats, betrayal, public backlash, even isolation from people she once considered allies. But she had come through it, not untouched, not unchanged, but unshaken in her core belief that respect is not conditional, and dignity is not earned by how you look or what title you carry. It's the right of every human being. And in proving that she didn't just change banks, she changed people. The culture within Monarch Federal began to shift, not with slogans or emails, but with action. Branches now include anonymous reporting systems. Executives underwent immersive empathy training. Danielle personally oversaw the reinstatement of 4 employees who had been pushed out for speaking up. Diversity reports were no longer buried in quarterly updates. They were broadcast. She launched a permanent internal program called Stand with Truth, designed to track customer equity across all branches. For the first time in the company's history, frontline employees had direct access to report to the CEO's office without going through managerial channels. What had started as a personal test had become a company-wide reformation. But Danielle knew the real victory wasn't policy. It was awareness. It was that moment when a young teller in San Diego asked a quiet older man if he needed help with his form, rather than assuming he was confused. It was the moment a regional manager stopped a meeting to correct a bias-laced comment. It was the moment people started listening, even when it was uncomfortable. Yet, even as the public moved on, Danielle didn't. She kept every letter she received from customers, employees, even strangers who wrote from other industries, people who said they finally felt seen. And now and then, when the days grew hard again, she would take those letters out, read one, and remind herself why she had done it all. It wasn't for the press. It wasn't for legacy. It was for that cashier who couldn't speak up. For that teenager who watched the video and said, maybe I could lead too. It was for her mother, who never got to see her name on a plaque. For her father, who once said, change happens when someone decides to stay. After the easy part is over, Danielle had stayed. And that made all the difference. If you're hearing this now, feeling that tight pull in your chest, the one that says, "I've felt this too," then know this story is yours as much as it is hers. Because racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears a tie. Sometimes it smiles while denying you. Sometimes it whispers, "Not a good fit," or "just doing our job." However, stories like Danielle's prove that silence is not a guarantee of safety. That sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply stand your ground and say, "Check the facts. See me. I belong here." There's something else this story teaches us, too. Something urgent and real. It teaches us that change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from the moments in between. The moment you speak up in the break room. The moment you offer your seat. The moment you stop assuming and start listening. That's where equity lives, not in statements or audits, but in everyday decisions. And Danielle made those decisions even when they came at a cost. She could have fired Stephen Aldrich and walked away. She could have swept the internal corruption under the rug to protect her image. She could have smiled and nodded, keeping the peace. But instead she fought. And it wasn't glamorous. It was hard, lonely, painful. But it was right. So now it's your turn. Maybe you're not a CEO. Perhaps you're a teacher, a student, a security guard, a nurse. It doesn't matter. You have a voice. And if this story stirred something inside you, a memory, a frustration, a fire, then don't let it fade. Use it. Say something next time. Defend someone. Next time, ask a question next time, because Danielle Harper's story didn't end in a boardroom. It's still being written in branches, in classrooms, in everyday choices, and it needs you. So here's what we ask of you, not as viewers, but as witnesses to her courage. Press the like button. If Danielle's story meant something to you, please share your thoughts, experiences, and encouragement in the comments below. Tell us where you saw yourself in this journey. Tell Danielle she's not alone, because she isn't. None of us should ever be silenced. Not now, not ever. And most of all, subscribe to this channel. If you want more stories like this. Real stories, powerful stories. Stories that push us, challenge us, and inspire us. Stories that don't just entertain, but awaken. Because leadership doesn't always come in a suit. Sometimes it walks into a bank lobby quietly holding a wallet and a name, and sometimes it leaves that building having reminded the world what it means to see with more than just your eyes. Danielle Harper didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a reminder that respect isn't reserved for the loudest, the richest, the most powerful. It belongs to all of us, and if we start acting like that, really acting like that, then maybe the next time someone like Danielle walks in, they won't have to prove they belong, they'll just be welcomed. And wouldn't that be a better world? Thank you for walking with us through this journey. Thank you for seeing yourselves. It isn't the end of the story. It marks the beginning of something better, something braver. We'll see you in the following story. And until then, stand with the truth.